Morning. Oh, if you have time to linger for just a while out of your busy and very important day, for the goldfinches that gather in the field of thistles, for a musical battle to see who can sing the highest note, or the lowest, or the most expressive of mirth, or the most tender. Their strong blunt beaks in the air as they strive melodiously, not for your sake, and not for mine, and not for the sake of winning, but for sheer delight and gratitude. Believe us, they say, this is a serious thing. Just to be alive on this fresh morning in this broken world, I beg you, do not walk by without pausing to attend to this rather ridiculous performance. It could mean something. It could mean everything. It could mean what Rilke meant when he wrote, "You must change your life." Good morning and welcome. Unitarian Universalists have provided a religiously liberal option in Pottstown for about 55 years. With hearts alive, we continue that tradition with hope that here each is truly seen, that here each will be welcomed into the garden of this community, where the simple and the elegant, the fluted and the thrilled, the shy and the dramatic complement one another and are treasured. May we know here each contributes in their way to the beauty of the whole. Come, let us worship together all genders, sexualities, politics, clappers and non-clappers, progressive or conservative. May we root ourselves in the values of this faith: compassion and courage, transcendence, justice, and transformation. Ooh, I need a chalice lighted today. Oh. Thank you. We light this chalice, the spark of the original fire of creation, to remind us that we all on this planet, the furred, the feathered, the finned, and the scaled, along with us featherless bipeds, we are all made of the same star stuff and all share a common destiny. We all share the same hopes of a life free from harm and suffering, and the same aspirations of happiness, love, and flourishing, being able to express our own unique natures and capacities as best we may. We are just that many diverse perspectives from which the whole is seen and experienced. We are inextricably intertwined, interconnected, and interdependent, and it is good. We're going to take a little time to center this morning. So just find a comfortable posture, alert, but not rigid. Let go of any tension. Shoulders are down. It helps to relax the muscles in your face. And now begin to pay attention to your breath. You don't need to control your breath, just breathe naturally. And be aware of relaxing a little bit each time you breathe out. And be aware of a warm area near where your heart is. I will ring this chime. See if you can be aware of that area where your heart is for as long as you can hear the chime. And now we can transition. And we'll sing the first hymn, which is Spirit of Life. My gratitude to our Miranda. You guys can sit.
So today, Miranda asked me to read this story called Tiny Bird, a Hummingbird's Amazing Journey. Do you know anything about hummingbirds? Have you ever seen a hummingbird? Yeah? How big are they? Do you know? Ooh, smaller than that. Yeah, that's about right. Can you hold your hand up? Yeah, about 2 to 3 inches. Hummingbirds, I mean, there's different species, but hummingbirds can be very, very small. And this story is about a ruby-throated hummingbird, which is one you can see there. Why do you think they call it ruby-throated? Cyrus?
Because it has a red thread.
Yeah, the red throat. Right on the nose. Okay. So first, before the story, there's a few facts about hummingbirds. I'm going to show you here too, because it's a little hard to read over there. So it says, a hummingbird's nest is only about the size of a quarter. Can you imagine holding a quarter in your hand? Yeah, imagine that, having a hummingbird nest in your hand. Only female hummingbirds sit on the nest. So the male never does. Let's see. This is an actual size of a ruby-throated hummingbird. So they're about 3.5 inches from head to tail, and their wings are about 4.5 inches across when they spread them out wide. A hummingbird's wings beat more than 50 times per second. Have you ever seen a hummingbird hover in midair? You can't really see their wings at all. It's just this sort of blur. There's a picture there of a chicken egg compared to a hummingbird egg. Right? Tiny, I know. And in the bottom right there, it says a hummingbird's migration often includes a flight of more than 500 miles across the Gulf of Mexico. So we're going to read a story of a hummingbird who travels from New England, New Hampshire-ish, all the way down the east coast of the United States, past Pennsylvania, where we live. And then she has to fly all the way across the Gulf of Mexico to her winter home. A long journey, it's dangerous. So today is the day. In the yard, the last orange flowers open their petals to the slanting sun. A tiny ruby-throated hummingbird is feeding. Just 3 inches long, tiny bird hovers above a blossom as if hanging from an unseen thread. Whirr, its wings flutter more than 50 times a second, so rapidly they're nearly invisible. Zip, it darts up, zap, it flits down, flower to flower, backward, forward, under, over, like an acrobat of the air. Radiant green feathers glimmering, ruby throat shimmering, tiny bird delicately dips its beak into the heart of each flower, extracting precious nectar. It will need as much food as it can gather for the hard trip ahead. The flowers are fading, insects grow quiet, leaves are turning yellow. Autumn is coming. Born in this northeastern yard, tiny bird has explored every inch of its small territory. But now it feels a pull and it knows it must go. It must leave this familiar place and fly to a far-off winter home. Today is the day. Away, heading south all alone, tiny bird begins its amazing journey. It flies low, skimming the tops of trees. Zoom, its wings rapidly rotating. Tiny bird speeds along, sometimes nearly 30 miles an hour. It's as fast as a car can drive. No one sees it gliding over farms, fields, train tracks, smokestacks, houses, and schools, but tiny bird sees everything. Its eyes are sharp. Swoop. Diving down, it spots a few flowers on which to feed. Jab, poke. Flicking sideways, it snatches a passing fly and even raids a spiderweb. More fuel for its long trip. You know, I didn't know until I started reading this book that hummingbirds would also eat insects. I thought it was just nectar. Oops, danger. Quickly, tiny bird zigzags out of the path of a hawk, reeling from the whoosh of the hawk's enormous wings. A close call. What do you think the hawk might do?
Yeah.
Good. Day after day, farther and farther, pausing to rest here and there along the way, tiny bird travels southward. And yet, it must keep going. The most difficult part of its perilous journey is soon to come. What does perilous mean? Do you know? Can you imagine from the story what you think perilous might mean? It's a long, perilous journey. Dangerous. Excellent. The Gulf of Mexico lies waiting. Dark blue, deep and vast, it glitters in the sun. Tiny bird lingers for a moment near the shore, its tongue unfurling to gather flower nectar. Quicker than a blink, it naps one last mosquito. Then, into the air, over the first pounding waves, it begins its nonstop flight of more than 20 hours. Can tiny bird make it? Many hummingbirds never do. As far as the distant horizon, there's nothing but sky and sea. An empty expanse of water stretches in all directions. Tiny bird makes its way, staying just inside the curves of the waves to protect itself from the onrushing wind. Now, a fish leaps up, its jaws snapping, narrowly missing the little bird. Did you know that fish could catch birds? As the setting sun turns the sky orange, dark clouds form. A sudden storm stirs up the sea. Between flashes of lightning, tiny bird struggles, fighting through the wind and pelting rain. Thunder crashes. Boom! Slower, slower, tiny bird begins to falter. Its wings grow heavy as it dips ever closer to the dangerous water. So really long flight with nowhere to land. Well, he's not at the beach yet. This is 500 miles. He has to fly for 20 hours. Very tired. Oh, but look. Finally, the wind dies down. The storm moves on. In the darkness ahead, a small fishing boat rocks, its dim light swaying. A resting place. Tiny bird perches lightly on the bow of the wooden boat, gathering strength. Then into the night again. Do you see the bird? Where are you? Yep, right there in the tippy top, the front of the bow. No, the bow is the front of the boat. Do you see the bird right there?
Yeah.
So tiny, little 3-inch bird. Marbled clouds pass. Moonlight opens a smooth and widening path on the water. Millions of stars blanket the sky. At last, Earth's horizon glimmers with the first hint of day. Suddenly, in the dawn light, bubble waves curl. Land! green trees and vines, rainbow-hued flowers. Tiny bird is worn thin after its travels. Exhausted, it rests on a twig for precious seconds. Then it flies into the forest to feed on plentiful flowers and insects. Today is the day. After flying more than 1,500 miles, Tiny Bird has arrived. It has reached its winter home at last. In the spring, it will return, flying back to the same yard it left so many months earlier. But for now, Tiny Bird rests and feeds, flickering from flower to flower, like an emerald spark flashing in the bright sun. Yes, today is the day. So do you know what this is? Oh, it does. What's this flower called? This flower is called a bird of paradise. Do you think it looks like a little bit like a bird? Can you imagine these orange bits are kind of like its wings stretched out? Yeah. Wow, bird of paradise flowers are delicious hummingbirds. Okay. Oh, the tiny bird meeting. Are you ready to go to class? Oh, this is just the cover. I'll put it back on. Okay, guys, let's see if you want to your class.
I'd love to be ready to. And it's time for the offertory. Again. Thank you. Before you do that, I will. I have something to say that I had put in the wrong place, so about the offertory. Thank you for your gifts, and may we be committed to using these gifts to make a difference in the world, to increase love and justice, to decrease hatred and oppression, to expand beloved community, to share and keep sharing as long as we ever can. Okay, thank you, Miranda. Is that listed? Tell us about it. The title.
It's called The Swan from the Carnival of the End.
Good, thank you. Um. So I have some readings, and the readings are from a book called Are We Smart Enough to Know How Smart Animals Are? Written by Franz de Waal. The first reading. It was long thought that our brain contained more neurons than any others on the planet, regardless of size. But we now know that the elephant has 3 times as many neurons, 257 billion to be exact. These neurons are differently distributed, though, with most of the elephants in its cerebellum. It has also been speculated that pachyderm brain, being so huge, has many connections between far-flung areas, almost like an extra highway system, which adds complexity. In our own brain, we tend to emphasize the frontal lobes, hailed as the seat of rationality. But according to the latest anatomical reports, they are not truly exceptional. The human brain has been called a linearly scaled up primate brain, meaning that no areas are disproportionately large. All in all, the neural differences seem insufficient for human uniqueness to be a foregone conclusion. If we ever find a way of measuring it, consciousness could well turn out to be widespread. But until then, some of Darwin's ideas will remain just a tad too dangerous. This is not to deny that humans are special. In some ways, we evidently are. But if this becomes the a priori assumption for every cognitive capacity under the sun, we are leaving the realm of science and entering that of belief. Being a biologist who teaches in a psychology department, I am used to different ways disciplines approach this issue. In biology, neuroscience, and the medical sciences, continuity is the default assumption. It could be otherwise, because it couldn't be otherwise, because why would anyone study fear in a rat, amygdala, in order to treat human problems, if not for the premise that all mammalian brains are similar? Continuity across life forms is taken for granted in these disciplines, and however important humans may be, they are a mere speck of dust in the larger picture of nature. Increasingly, psychology is moving in the same direction, but in other social sciences and the humanities, discontinuity remains the typical assumption. I am reminded of this every time I address these audiences after a lecture that inevitably, even if I don't always mention humans, reveals similarities between us and other hominids. The question invariably arises, but what does it mean to be human? The word "but" at the beginning of that sentence sort of sweeps all the similarities aside in order to get to the all-important question of what sets us apart. I usually answer with the iceberg metaphor, according to which there is a vast mass of cognitive, emotional, and behavioral similarities between us and our primate kin, but there is also a tip containing a few dozen differences. The natural sciences try to come to grips with the whole iceberg, whereas the rest of academia is happy to stare at the tip. In the West, fascination with this tip is old and unending. Our unique traits are invariably judged to be positive, noble even, although it wouldn't be hard to come up with a few unflattering ones as well. We are always looking for one big difference, whether it is opposable thumbs, cooperation, humor, pure altruism, language, or the anatomy of the larynx. So the second reading also from, are we smart enough to know how smart animals are? Even more egregious than human chest beating, another primate pattern is the tendency to disparage other species. Well, not just other species, because there is a long history of the Caucasian male declaring himself genetically superior to everyone else. Ethnic triumphalism is extended outside our species when we make fun of Neanderthals as brutes devoid of sophistication. We now know, however, that Neanderthal brains were slightly larger than ours, that some of their genes were absorbed into our own genome, and that they knew fire, burial, hand axes, and musical instruments, and so on. Perhaps our brothers will finally get some respect. When it comes to the apes, however, contempt persists. It is out of insecurity that we love the contrast with other hominids. And so it's time for the next hymn, and that is number 203. All creatures of the earth and the sky. For our slide of Dr. DeWall. Is it?
Yeah.
Oh. What did I see? Oh, I see, because I only see half of it. In last month's UUFP newsletter, The Sojourner, I committed to presenting a talk this morning on natural wonders. and I didn't expand much on the idea. I think I suggested that my talk would concern nature, and I had a hazy idea of what I would prepare, perhaps based on my own reflections on a sermon topic from months ago on wonder, but knew that the research ahead of me and the resources I found would largely determine the specifics. I agreed to speak on Sunday mornings because I know I'm going to learn a lot as I'm preparing. Well, you've cast your lot with me this morning without much of an idea of what you're in for. So here we go. Hope you enjoy this as much as I enjoyed preparing for it. To get started writing my talk, I looked a little at my title and went from there. I promised something about nature and I used the word wonder. If I put that in the text of the newsletter item, I wondered, would you wonder whether I was talking about the verb to wonder or the noun wonder? Would I present a program of thoughts and images that provide a feeling of surprise mingled with admiration caused by some beautiful, unexpected, unfamiliar, something inexplicable? Or did you ask yourself, will she talk about something she doesn't know the answer to or is very curious about? And the answer to that is, of course, both. I'll share my awe and admiration for some amazing animal species, and I'll put to you questions I wonder about. This morning's readings were taken from Frans de Waal's book, Are We Smart Enough to Know How Animals Are? De Waal is a Dutch-American biologist. He is the C.H. Candler Professor at Emory University and Director of the Living Link Center at the Yerkes Primate Center. He's a primatologist and ethologist. An ethologist is a scientist who studies the behavior of animals in their natural environment. And he's the author of numerous books with really great titles. Chimpanzee Politics and Our Inner Ape, for example, but I think the most recent publication was maybe 2018. I'm not referring to that this morning, but anyway, look for his work. It's D-E, capital W, A-A-L, de Waal. So let's see. His research centers on primate social behavior, including conflict resolution, cooperation, inequity aversion, and food sharing. So to begin with, I have a personal reflection to share with you. It's what steered me to de Waal's research in the first place. I've based this talk on an event that filled me with wonder, and I have wondered about it over and over again. It was an ordinary thing that happened, but to this day, I still feel the wonder and then come the questions. This thought has so fascinated me over the years that I've come to the conclusion that if I had had this experience when I was younger, my career choice would have been totally different. Back in the 1980s, I worked as the registrar for educational programs at the Academy of Natural Sciences in Philadelphia. And as such, I scheduled thousands of public and private school students into natural history museum programs throughout the school year, and as well kept registration lists for the museum's adult education programs and expeditions. I loved working at the Academy. I loved being in the middle of what it takes to run a busy museum and its programs. And I loved working with the exceptional people that made it all happen. I was able to take advantage of the classes and expeditions, sometimes led by scientists who worked in the research departments of the Academy. Can you hear me? Okay. One department was of particular interest to me. It's called VIRIO, Visual Resources for Ornithology. It's a curated collection of 80 avian photographs. When I was working at the Academy, all of those photographs were on slides. So it took a lot of, maintenance. It is the most comprehensive image bank in the world, and the images were taken by some of the best wildlife photographers in the world. If you read a textbook, a book for popular reading, or a recent journal or magazine, or an article on ornithology, chances are you've looked at a photo from that wonderful collection. And you can tell because down at the bottom left side, lots of times, it'll say Vireo. You know that's from Philly. At one point, I learned that there would be an opening in Vireo for an archive assistant. I've never done that before, but I entertained the idea of applying for the job. At the same time, I saw that there was listed in the newest issue of the education program catalog a wildlife photography course taught by some of the Vireo staff. Long story short, I took the photography course and enjoyed it thoroughly. Although I can't say that I got any better at wildlife photography, but never applied for the job either. Instead, I went off to Drexel University's School of Library and Information Science for my master's degree and never looked back, except for one Vireo experience. One assignment for the photography course was to spend a day taking pictures at the Philadelphia Zoo. And one of these moments I experienced there that day has stuck with me ever since. That day I took a few pictures of flamingos, giraffes, ducks, tortoises, big cats, and peacocks, and then stopped in front of the primate house. There was one gorilla sitting in the outdoor enclosure, a magnificent creature, sitting quietly. It was a quiet day. It was a lovely day at the zoo, a weekday and very early in the fall, which meant that there were no school groups there. As a registrar for the museum education programs at the academy, I knew it was too early in the school year for teachers and students to make a trip to the zoo. They are at that time getting into their classroom routines and aren't ready to function as cohesive, cooperative units on a field trip. So it was unusually quiet. There were very few people at the zoo that day. I remember really realizing that I was the only person standing at the primate enclosure and that it was just the gorilla and me. He was sitting on a rock or a stump and appeared to be looking around sometimes, simply enjoying the day. And then we noticed each other sort of at the same time. And for what felt like a very long time, we simply beheld each other. And we stayed this way. Once in a while, he'd glance away to survey the area or look at the trees or birds or something, and then he'd look back at me. I was thoroughly aware at that moment, joyfully aware of coexisting with this gorilla in our shared surroundings. There was the blue sky that happened in September that first started showing up for a few days in August. White clouds, unusual calm and quiet with hushed Schuylkill Highway sounds in the background. So thoroughly aware of sharing, of being in community with this magnificent animal, a joy and a wonder. Of course, then I had to wonder if he felt or thought anything akin to what I was thinking. And the wondering never left me. To this day, I wonder if he was able to share a communal sense of being in that setting with me, another primate, a human, a communal sense of being that brings me great comfort when I'm with other people. So that's my recollection, my inspiration. So, but I have another example, and it's from a collection of essays written by Helen MacDonald. It's called Vesper Flights. She's an English writer, a naturalist, and an affiliated research scholar at the University of Cambridge's Department of History and Philosophy and Science. The essay is entitled The Observatory. And I'm just going to read a small part of that essay. I never cared much for swans until the day a swan told me I was wrong. It was a cloudy morning and I was suffering from a recently broken heart. I sat myself down on a concrete step by Jesus' Lock and was staring at the river, feeling the world was just as cold and gray, when a female mute swan hoisted herself out from the water and stumped toward me on leathery legs, leathery interned webbed feet and sturdy black legs. I assumed she wanted food. Swans can break an arm with one blow of their wing, I remember. One of those warnings from childhood that get annealed into adult fight or flight responses. Part of me wanted to get up and move further away, but most of me was just too tired. I watched her snaky neck, black eye, her blank hauteur. I expected her to stop, but she did not. She walked right up to where I sat on the step, her head towering over mine. Then she turned around to face the river, shifted left, and plonked herself down. So close, her wing feathers were pressed against my thighs. Let no one ever speak of swans as being airy, insubstantial things. I was sitting with something the size of a large dog, and now I was too astonished to be nervous. I didn't know what to do. I grasped, bewildered, for the correct interspecies social etiquette. She looked at me incuriously and then tucked her head sideways and backwards into her raised coverts, neck curved, and fell fast asleep. We sat there together for 10 minutes until a family came past and the toddler made a beeline for her. She slipped back into the water and plowed upstream. As I watched her leave, something shifted inside me and I began to weep with an emotion I recognized as gratitude. That day was when swans turned into real creatures for me, and it has spurred me since to seek out others. Later in the same essay, MacDonald says, it's impossible to regard the natural world without seeing something of our own caught up in it. Back on that wintry riverside, a swan had come toward me and offered me strange companionship at a time when I thought loneliness was all I could feel. In this essay, I found another human with a similar sense of connectedness to a being of a different species. I guess I felt kind of corroborated, justified in my belief or sense that some other animals share our ability to empathize. Does that ability to empathize make them capable of ethical decisions? Do they feel compassion? The answer to that is, of course, yes, because humans are ethical, make moral decisions, and are animals. But how much of that propensity do we share with other species? Just how interconnected are we in our awareness of each other's being, emotion, just their situation? Scientists have long believed that animals are not capable of ethical or moral thought and planning. But consider Franz de Waal's view that our understanding of the primate mind is clearer when we consider their altruism. He suggests in his book, this is a quote, such as when younger female chimps collect water in their mouths for an aging female who can barely walk anymore, spitting it into her open mouth so she doesn't have to walk all the way to the spigot. He refers to the British primatologist Jane Goodall, who described how Madame B, a wild chimpanzee, had become too old and weak to climb into fruiting trees. She would patiently wait at the bottom for her daughter to carry down fruits, upon which the two of them would contentedly munch together. In such cases, chimps grasp a problem and come up with a fresh solution. But the striking part here is that they perceive another ape's problem. I like that. Does it mean that when the swan plonked herself down beside MacDonald, she, the swan, was perceiving a need in MacDonald? That the swan was doing what the Buddhists like to call sitting with someone's pain? Does it lend credence to my sense that the gorilla was perceiving that we were both enjoying the sharing of a beautiful day? In The Bonobo and the Atheist, which is another of Duvall's books, In Search of Humanism Among Primates, he says, those who explain that animals are not people tend to forget that while true, it is equally true that people are animals. He goes on, to minimize the complexity of animal behavior without doing the same for human behavior erects an artificial barrier. He says, I personally adhere to a different law of parsimony, according to which, if two closely related species act the same under similar circumstances, the mental processes behind their behavior are likely the same too. The alternative would be to postulate that in the short time since they diverged, both species evolved different ways of generating the same behavior. From an evolutionary standpoint, this is a convoluted proposal. Unless it can be proven that if an ape comforts another, its motivation differs from that of a person doing the same, I prefer the more elegant assumption that both species follow the same urges. Quoting him again, by studying social behaviors in animals such as bonding, the herd instinct, the forming of trusting alliances, expressions of consolation, and conflict resolution, Duvall demonstrates that humans and animals and humans are pre-programmed to reach out. He has found that chimpanzees care for mates that are wounded by leopards, elephants offer reassuring rumbles to youngsters in distress, and dolphins support sick companions near the water's surface to prevent them from drowning. From day one, humans have innate sensitivities to faces, bodies, and voices. We've been designed to feel for one another. In his book, The Age of Empathy, Nature's Lessons for a Kinder Society, Duvall gives more examples of interspecies aid and comfort. Human swimmers, he says, saved by dolphins or whales, sometimes protected against sharks or lifted to the surface the same way these animals support one another. He says he finds help that crosses the species barrier most intriguing, including cases of apes saving birds or of a seal rescuing a dog. The latter happened in public view in a river in Middlesbrough, England. It's hard for me to say that. I grew up in a town, Middleborough, but there's an S in the middle of that. Middlesbrough, England, when an old dog that could barely keep his head above the water was nudged to shore by a seal. According to an eyewitness, a seal popped up out of nowhere. He came behind it and actually pushed it. This dog would not have survived if it hadn't been for that seal. On visits to the Milwaukee Zoo, Duvall visited the bonobos often. He lived in the area for a while, so he would go often just to visit. He relates that bonobos showed all sorts of remarkable expressions of empathy, especially their alpha male, Lodi. He was very protective, for example, of an aging female, her name was Kitty. Being blind as well as deaf, Kitty risked getting lost in a building full of doors and tunnels. In the morning, Rhodey would gently bring her to her favorite sunny spot outside in the grass. And by the end of the day, wake her up and guide her back indoors, taking her by the hand. If Kitty had one of her seizures, Rhodey would refuse to leave her side. I am touched to learn that scientists have recently measured gratitude in chimps. So we've talked about care and comfort, but they're also now, I think because of Duvall's work, trying to measure what he has found. So they're looking for gratitude or looking for proof of it, I suppose. I think that's backwards in science, but they're interested anyway. Following up on Duvall's observations. As well, Duvall has inspired researchers to develop humane tests in natural settings to test the scientists' observations, and they are voluntary, meaning the chimps are not made to perform tests. They're not in labs. It's all in a natural setting. They participate in the testing if they want to. They enter and leave the testing area of their own accord. So we've covered examples of empathy and aid and comfort in primates. Here is an example of gratitude in a primate expressed by a chimp Duvall had taught to bottle feed a baby. He writes, she had lost several offspring because of deficient lactation and was eager to adopt. Her previous losses had caused her deep depressions, during which she'd isolate herself and scream for no apparent reason. Apart from raising this young chimp, she was able to keep her own infants in subsequent years, thanks to her special skill. For a tool-using animal, giving the bottle is really not hard. So he taught her how to use a bottle to feed the baby. For the rest of her life, this female was always insanely excited to see me, which happened only once every couple of years, as if I were a long-lost family member. It seemed related to my having helped her start a family. Another illustration of gratitude is in a telling anecdote by Wolfgang Kohler, the German pioneer of ape tool use. Two chimps had been shut up out of their shelter during a rainstorm when Kohler happened to come by and found the apes soaking wet, shivering in the rain. He opened the door for them, but instead of hurrying past him to enter the dry area, both chimps first hugged the professor in a frenzy of satisfaction. Duvall's work and writing has given me new awareness of the complexity of primate minds and has helped me understand how their empathetic skills or empathic skills were a natural development and quite necessary for hunting and gathering. I've given you lots of examples, to me, wonder-inspiring behavior in other species. And that's where I'm ending. This is what I found and I'm sharing. And I wonder if anyone here has some story like that. Have you ever had an experience like that? Oh. Anyone? Yeah.
Let me just say.
Sure.
So I've always been really moved by Jane Goodall and primates in general, and I grew up near Philadelphia, so a lot of the things that you said brought back a lot of memories. And I remember going on a field trip, and everyone was boisterous. And when we got to the primate exhibit, there was a large gorilla, and it didn't have quite the same experience, and it did change me forever. It was a large solitary gorilla in an inside exhibit, which was very plain and really was just sliding itself across the glass and then the walls in circles over and over and over. And it changed me forever just to see how I empathize with that thing so much. And and how it must live its life. You know, in this exhibit where people are just watching, and everyone was laughing at it. It's just- I'll never forget that.
Yeah, I wondered about that too, when that happened to me at the zoo, because I wondered if I was making him uncomfortable at all, although he was probably quite accustomed to people staring. I mean, I didn't feel like I was staring, I felt like it was just really. And how could he know that? And what does he know? And, you know, how did he feel? And it's just a never ending question. And my next question is, which wasn't approached in any of my reading, is do they recognize beauty? So here we are.
I used to work with primates when I was like back right after I graduated college, and I had baboons in our facility the one day, and we mostly dealt with like rhesus macaques and cyno monkeys with long tails. And the baboons were really different. They had like this massive canines, and they were very intimidating looking, and they looked like little baby werewolves. Like that's how I described them.
Werewolves.
One day I came in and I never dealt with the primate species that spoke so much, and it was like, they were in this one center room, and it's kind of like a big horseshoe building, and I thought people were in my building, and it's a very secure place, so like we couldn't have people just wandering around, and I was really freaked out because it was the first time I heard people talking, and I was like, what is that noise? And I came and I looked, I peeked in their room, and here it was that the baboons, and they were talking to each other, and it was just so cool, and they were just like, the way that their vocalizations, it sounded like a person, like it was just so, it was really cool. And then when I went in there, I was giving them extra treats, and they got real quiet, and then as soon as I left the room, they started talking. It was really cool. They were really, really awesome.
Anyone else? Thank you so much, everyone. So how about closing hymn number 325, Love Makes a Bridge? Distinguish our chalice. I think it's in the thing. We distinguish this flame, but not the light of wisdom, but warmth of community, or the honor of beauty. These we gather in our hearts. And unleashed. Even as a mother protects with her life, her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart may we cherish all living things, radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the sky and downwards to the depths. And I think that we have. Postman.